we decided to make a quick little trip up to Door County to visit the home of George Ohm, W9EVT, and these are some of the highlights from that trip. George lives with his wife, Susan, on Washington Island in Wisconsin, which is at the tip of the Wisconsin Peninsula, which is quite secluded. The closest freeway is almost 100 miles away. But boy, is it worth the trip. George has one of the largest radio collections in the world, and a lot of one-off radios. So let's take a look. This is George's main operating station, which includes a Flex 6300, an IC 7800, an IC 7300, a Ten-Tec Orion 2, a Ten-Tec Omni 7, and a Heath SS 9000. The radio that caught my eye was the blue radio, the Hilberling PT 8000A, a German radio, which is a one-off. This is the view looking up from the main operating station, and most of the equipment you see here is fully functional. Looking back from the main operating station, this is what you see, a virtual history of radio, some dating back to pre-World War II. So let's let George show us a little bit of his collection.
This is the first pad adapter in 1937 by National, and this is their first regenerative receiver. And Carl and I were talking when I was about 8 years old, Carl said, get on the telephone and call National. And they connected me to a man called Millen, left National and went into business making his own equipment. And some very excellent, I have most of it here, the Millen equipment, but he's when I talked to him, I said, I read an article that you are going to, in your next receiver at National, are going to have a meter in it, an S meter. He says, that's true. And he says, in fact, he says, I'm looking at my desk here. He says, I have 2 prototypes here. And he says, we're trying to decide which one to use. And we talked about it. He says, yes, it'll probably be in our next radio. And when he said, who are you with? I'm with Carl Hassel. Oh, Carl is with you. Let me talk to him on the phone. And a week later, I received in the mail the first S meter that was ever made for a radio, except maybe people did on the side. It's in a wooden cabinet that they made, and it plugs into a National. And I don't know what its value is, but it's the first S meter.
Awesome. That's very cool.
And the only reason that I got it is because I knew Carl, who was the guy who helped set up all the frequencies with Hiram Percy Maxim, and also I sat with Carl, I would say 5 hours a day for 4 years. And my radio convention, and this was done, let's see, September 18th, and this is 1937. And basically I went there, and Carl invited me because he was going to be at one of the speaker tables, and he invited me and my mother. First radio equipment. During World War II, Carl managed to get for me a Harriman receiver, an SP600.
Okay.
I had an SX28 here and an ARR. To get radios during the Second World War, a lot of these things were made for the government for things, but I have another one here that has a meter in it, but this is the original. The other one that I had, and I think it originally cost about $400, $400 or $500, which is in those days it's triple the amount of money now. And I had a Texan that offered to buy it for me for $2. I bought 3 75A4s, and here they are on this side desk. See? And he says, I am giving them on Monday morning. I'm giving them to our lab, and I want them to come up with a radio that is better than the 70. They got 3. They put it on sale for $1,000. It cost Hallercrafters close to $1,500 to make it, and they sold it for $1,000. And they still, 20 to 1, people still bought the Collins and not the Hallercrafters. In other words, Hallercrafters, you could get a radio for $38 during World War II, and they came up with a whole new company called Echophone, because when they sold it, they took the transformer out of it. for 115 volts, telephone, and she would answer on the phone, echo phone, and they were expecting sometime a call from a lawyer say, hey, you've just electrocuted my son, or whatever it happens to be. And oh, by the way, these Millen, this is a 1939 model here of an antenna tuner of Millen. Well, here's a BC610, and they said, we understand you know more about military equipment than anyone else. And they said, could we hire you? And they came up with some of these IBM sheets, which is said like on one of the sheets, maybe 3,000 items. And one was 25 of them, one was 100 of them. And he said, what's an SCR 299? I said, that's a 10.5 truck with a motor generator on a trailer. It has a BC610. It has a Ham SX73.
Oh, okay, yep.
But I don't think there were hardly any ever sold, because I think they ran about $7,000 at that time. No, back during World War II, 7,000 was running a rifle range and a pistol range in Eastford, Connecticut, a camp for boys. And it was connected to the school that I went to in Chicago, which was called Chicago Latin. That receiver, and then I bought a Millen exciter, parts for a power supply, for a 700 volt power supply, and a lot of things. And I went about 4 doors down, there was a surplus store, and I bought a ski pack, which is it came with 150 watts. I bought the transformers for a power supply. I bought a microphone. I bought a number of things, and we unpacked all the stuff from new and packed it loosely into this canvas cover. And then they helped me carry it down the stairs, because I am stored in Boston. BC610 didn't radiate like me. I know with my BC610, I could basically guaranteed to work 400 or 500 TVs at any one time, because channel 3 and channel 4 was completely blanked out by anybody that had a BC610. Come on up, this is my Collins. They cost over $90,000 because LeMay, which was a friend of mine, and Art Collins was told by we were at that time sending 4 atomic weapon carrying airplanes, B-36s, 2 on the East Coast, 2 on the West Coast, that would always be in the air. Some transceivers that will give about 600-700 watts, 800 watts, and work all bands, and be on single sideband. And we want you to use the Zenith system, which was a man which by the name of Wes Schrum. Ever hear of Wes Schrum?
Wes Schrum, yeah.
Yeah, well, was a good friend of mine. And Wes, it's going to take 90 days, but it took us 2 days to get here, so it's going to be 87 days we have to have them. And if we don't have them by that time, Collins Radio will be put out of business. We're closing it down. However, we're not telling you how many hours you have to work, how many subcontractors you have, or what you're going to charge us. But we have to have, they had also a flotation unit. But the re-entry cooked it. It didn't work. Most of the times, the flotation did not work because the re-entry caused problems. So the capsule would sit in the water, and if it stayed in there long enough, it would sink. And they say it had a problem for the recovery. And when we now then start to send astronauts up, but returning them with a plane that went up and went down, but went up by rocket but went down by conventional methods, we didn't.
We spent about 5 hours at George's QTH, and these were the highlights. George has just a wealth of history on radio and first-hand accounts. From Washington Island in Wisconsin, this is Dan at 9LVS 73.